You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
And I'm Shane. And we're here to introduce ourselves, and our wonderful characters are very original. I'll be playing Warlord Scarr today. He kills everything.
I will be playing Bob. Yeah, definitely Bob. Very, the
Perfect
most
fun.
originalist.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not exactly trivial to introduce your character to a game.
I mean, it probably shouldn't be trivial, or treated trivially, but yeah. At this point, the advice: don't start your party meetup in a tavern. Has been said for so long that I'm not sure anyone actually does, aside from uh, outside specific scenarios and contrarianism.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it's automatically a bad thing to have your party start in a tavern. Taverns are, potentially very flavorful and interesting places to have a setting, as it were.
Yeah.
It's just that we've gotten so used to them being misused by starter GMs, who just think that tavern is obviously it's the only place you can start it, but really it's the advantage of it is it's only going to be relevant some of the time, because the big advantage of having a tavern as your venue is that it's a social hub, that you're in the place where everyone in the town or village gets together, and that means you can expose characters to the goings on of the day, the different groups in the region. If there's a orc minority, they can be at the back of the bar, or it can be a bit of a squabble breaking out, or there's a huge amount of flexibility for what a tavern can do. The problem is that if you don't have an actual thing for the tavern to do, then you find that the tavern is a hindrance rather than a help, because the character is thinking that they need to perform a certain amount of let's say characterization theater. Will start they'll start bar fights, they'll start drinking contests, they'll start interrogating everyone in the bar, even though most of them are just random people you rolled up on a table. Like, the thing about introducing character, particularly if we're assuming that this is a first session sort of situation, you really need to think about, like, what is the purpose of the bar? What is the bar doing? And if it is, the point of this scene is to let people muck around, show what their characters are like, do boastful things, test their stats by throwing darts or drinking obscene amounts of whiskey or what have you. If that's your goal in this opening scene, then the tavern's perfect. But very often you'll have a setup where the theoretical goal is actually just accept the quest to go to where the quest is, and all the various bits and tassels that are on top of the bar, those are distractions from the actual goal of the scene. The usefulness of the scene is at odds with its objective, and you really would have been better off just starting off at the front of the dungeon for all the effects. And that's just sort of a general thing about introduction sessions, is like, you following tradition you really need to know why that tradition is there. And the tradition of starting in a bar is mainly because that is meant to set the characters in the world. But if you're just there for an evening's entertainment of stabbing goblins, then stab the goblins. Don't mess around with them stabbing poor drunkards.
Yeah, so to paraphrase you, it sounds like there's a disconnect between some people's perceptions of why a tavern is there, or why the tavern is there in the first session, why their PCs are in it, or why the players' PCs are in it, and
yeah, because one of the things is like there is sort of this. I don't want to say it's like a directive, but it's like this instinct where you're supposed to start off with character nonsense, and people that that's the correct foot to get off on is people jumping into character and doing their shtick to establish themselves. But I mean, couldn't you? This it sort of comes back to what I wouldn't say is a bad habit because it's so universal, but it is a maybe not optimal habit of how did you design your characters? Did you in all of your busy adult lives all go off, design your own personal OC with 5 pages of backstory, and then come back and demand that the GM figure out some cohesive way for them all to be, stabbing the same goblins at the same time? Maybe instead of that, you could have tried, sitting down, making the characters together, and deciding what way for them to get on the hero's journey would have worked as a group.
yeah, those are certainly both possibilities. I mean, another version of that is to in say from the start, like make your characters make characters that would want to do this adventure. If you're doing some sort of, I don't know, grand epic campaign where you're looking to build an empire and and what have you, don't have characters who just want to have a nice cozy life. Like that's just not a good fit.
Yeah,
And vice versa.
They'll be the most popular characters in your Game of Thrones series, but they won't be that useful for pushing the plot forward. They're the people for whom the plot happens to, and also tragically. And I mean, there are players who definitely want to be in that headspace of things happen to them, and then they respond to things happening to them with righteous anger. I mean, it's a Hollywood cliche for a reason, but again, this sort of is coming back to the problem of like what were you wanting to do, because there is nothing wrong with, as I said, having a session or even a session or two of the characters just sort of express themselves and just writing themselves large on the page. But is it useful for that to be at the table, or couldn't maybe not be better? I know there's one thing that White Wolf always recommended in this game was that each character should have sort of intro session, just them and the GM, to sort of. Often it would be like, oh, this is the story of how your character becomes a vampire or becomes an exalted or what have you.
An option. There was an optional method in the Cyberpunk 2020 GM book called Blue Booking, which was a very similar idea. One-on-one sessions where, but like basically explaining how a character got to be where they are.
Yeah, and that was, I believe, the idea was that you sort of write it out back and forth between the GM. So it was useful for, as I say, the 90s, where message boards and IRC were a major thing. So I recently did something like that with my online game, where the premise was that the party members are sort of dead and trapped in a cycle of eternally coming back from the dead to solve horrible dungeons. And our first few sessions was after we gotten character stats out of the way. First few sessions were how did your character first die, and there was no problem of having the rest of the party sort of as a kind of Greek chorus in the back of our heads as we went through each individual horrible death. We didn't. No one complained because we were in the right mindset. We were in the fun of seeing. It's the roof goblins got him. Poor roof goblins. And it was a bit of a lark, a bit of fun to just get us into the mood of the whole thing, and really get the whole black humor across. But at the same time, if you have a new group ready to go, all of them are kind of simultaneously wanting to have their bit of expression, and can you fit all that into one game and into one group? And that's sort of where you all start in tavern, you all start in town square, and because you have everyone wants to explain their shtick, but you don't have a group dynamic yet. That's where people can get disruptive, and sometimes you want disruptive, sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I mean that could fit in with a type of tone of game. I actually have a similar example in mind. I was in a Deathwatch campaign where at the first session was something of a feast, where the new members of the team who had just met basically were invited to tell a tale of their deeds, what got them selected for the Deathwatch. And there was actually a bit of renown on offer for impressive tales. So there was a little more of a meta incentive as well as trying to tell a good yarn.
Yeah, and that sort of that's a good way to bring across the social aspect of it, rather than just be we are strangers in a tavern. You have them, they're presenting themselves to the town, the community, or in this case, the Brotherhood of Transhuman Death Machines, and but because they have there's accepted structure. There's a structure of you go up and you tell your tale and you quaff 3 gallons of Space Wolf mead and whatever. That different structure gives people focus and lets them focus in on how to express their character in a way that's appropriate for the social situation that they're in. Whereas with your wide open, it is a tavern, everything that is a feature of my setting could conceivably pass through the doors of this tavern at any time, then because you're open to all kinds of possibilities, you find that the players get wildly different ideas about how they expect a scene to go than maybe you're expecting. And again, some people like the chaos. Some people would find it difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I nothing to disagree with there, to be honest.
I don't want to. Folks, if you ever meet me at a convention or sometime, I'll happily tell you the tale of the sewer badgers, which was the end results of one of my attempts to get all of my party members to meet in a tavern. Actually, technically, this was the second tavern. They'd already left the first one, found a second tavern. Anyway, it's a convention story. Don't worry about it.
Another example comes to mind. A friend from back in the day was telling me of a GM they used to go with who ran a lot of cyberpunk, and something of a calling card of theirs was to start every campaign with the characters in media res in the middle of a firefight.
Mm-hmm.
And that had a few effects. One, the first sessions were generally memorable, but two, it gave the characters that wonderful thing for getting them to cooperate and stick together, a common enemy.
Yeah.
So there's logic there.
Yeah, no, it's a good way to. It's short circuiting to the part that is important to you. I think is the big part, big element of a introduction section. And if you want to fast forward to the part where the characters have to work together, or the characters have to show themselves in the thick of the moment, then to start them in the thick of the moment is a smart move. Of course, this is one of those things where a less experienced GM might not think, well, actually, how do I want them to? What is the critical point I want them to start at? And so they sort of go for various defaults like town square, tavern, on the road to town. Uh, but and often they don't have the ability to discriminate, like what effect you want from your next game is that's one of the things you learn as a GM as time goes on.
Yeah, like you were saying, like what what you want to get to, and why not start there? And if what you want to get to is, I want these characters like talking to each other in character, then tavern can work. Like tavern could be a
That
great
would
setting
work.
for it.
Um,
Like taverns specifically are also a great way of well, as we alluded to earlier, of having just about anyone show up. Contacts, employers, hirelings, if you're in a campaign which accommodates that.
yeah, absolutely. Again, it behooves you to maybe make clear to the players, are they going to be at the same tavern on and off for the next 10 session of game, as sort of a wind down place between sessions, or is this, this tavern is but a facade in order to enable our characters meeting and teaming up, and after this, no more to worry about a single tavern evermore. If you're going with the latter, you're almost definitely going to end up with a bar fight just because someone gets twitchy and decides they want to roll dice. But if you make it clear that the former is what you have, and like that these people that you're meeting, they're going to be your fellows, your contacts, your they're going to matter to the player characters. They're not just set dressing. Um, that's going to be helpful for them to have, and I mean, secret, very important GM secret. It is actually okay to just tell your players important stuff like this tavern is important. This tavern, is going to come up again.
Nothing wrong with being clear.
Yep, nothing wrong with being clear. But yeah, I mean, let's look at some other methods of sort of introducing characters. We've sort of said about like the individual intro sessions. Um, There's also something to be said for, I mean, where we often just call it a session zero, where everyone, it's not so much about, the characters introduced to the setting, but rather that everyone makes their characters together in at the table or at the same session, so that each is sort of invested in the other's character creation process, and that helps them get an idea for what each character can do, what skills the party needs, but also what vibes each person is going for, or like what potential connections between players can you have, and that can be very important if you're going to be having a recurring party for an entire thing. Like having that session zero, those bonds can be very vital. But it also is one of those things that can get awkward if you're in, say, an OSR game where half the party are not going to be living through the session 3. then all of a sudden all these bonds and connections can be uh, disappointing, I suppose is one way of putting it. And it might be better to have, your tavern where everyone can show up. They'll show up as the 3d6 drop lowest. Actually, it might be some games that might be how it works. But you know what I mean. Once the stats come out and you have Billy number 3 comes out of the woodwork, there's no better place to find them than at this tavern.
Well, there's that. Yeah. There's also the prospect of the bar itself or the tavern itself having some great meaning for the PCs, as in, say, one of them this their parents' bar, or another this is the bar where they had their first drink. This is another. This is like the next door place, and they grew up listening to all sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good way of having them not burn it down in session 1.
I mean, if you ever want to use it again, I mean, it's our way, or maybe they've a grudge against the place. Oh, that so and so kicked me out when I was underage. I'll show them.
But
PCs, are they ever reasonable?
but it is a good point to say that like having a permanent fixture for a campaign is useful. Specifically for character introductions, it as said, it'd be good for a situation where you're going to be swapping out characters regularly, and that's not just necessarily just because of character death. It might be if you're in some kind of superheroes game where different people are playing different superheroes every session. I'm I don't know if that was a thing you're doing, but it's if you had sort of a guild hall mentality where it's less about what happens to the individual characters, but rather to the organization as a whole, then you put your effort into designing that organization. And then characters can be introduced a lot more easily because there's a inherent premise. They are part of the Adventurers Guild, or they are part of the Death Watch, or part of the Knights of Blue Silver, or whatever.
Or
And
put a spin on that the HQ of an organization could well be.
Absolutely, and that's again like. I mean, this is one of those things again that maybe a newer GM might not even think to ask is like, how often during a campaign are you going to be introducing new characters? Because if this is what I'll call a new trad campaign or story-esque campaign where you're pretty much expect the same roster characters to go through the entire life of a campaign, then it makes a lot more sense to be putting focus on what is the correct starting point for this group, and either start them in their firefight or start them in the front of the dungeon or at the maw of the abandoned space station, or telling tales to space wolves. Or are you going to be introducing new characters all the way through this campaign, whether death, replacement, unstable rosters, or maybe it's an open table where you're not guaranteed to have the same group every day. In which case, yeah, if you're doing something that often in a campaign, you want to have it be smooth and streamlined, and having the sort of shared origin or shared premise of Adventurers Guild, Tavern of Ne'er-do-Wells, what have you. That's a very important tool to have, as opposed to customizing a new introduction, a new introductory session for every character you have.
Yeah, no, I can see the sense of that. Another idea comes to mind that again, another spin on previous ones, but like even in a party where there's turnover, like kind of like a group can become a bit of a ship of Theseus thing, where over time new members come, like old members drop out or perish or turn to stone or what have you, and new members filter in. And legends could, like legends and stories of past activities can carry on, even though the original people who might have seen them, well, are all gone. Such as, well, the group was actually founded in a bar of all places after a legendary session in such and such. And you can have that sort of mythos. Like, I mean, if you look at a lot of like a lot of hotels or restaurants or what have you, there could be a bit of family background, or a something of a local character who set up the place originally, and they end up buying it off him or what have you. But no, just kind of mulling ideas around out loud.
Yeah. But I guess that sort of does lead to the question. It was like, what happens when you do have a unexpected situation of you had this group of characters came together, blood oaths were sworn on the first session, and they end up 20 levels deep in the dungeon, and poor Thaxios, the mighty, roll a one as saving throw, got turned to ashes, and now the GM has to suddenly orbital drop a new, 13th level barbarian in from orbit into this into the situation. What's a great way to handle this about their options, but like the least awkward way? Like, I mean, if you have a group of characters who are willing to sit through Thargorax II's own introduction session and the epic tale of how he got 20 levels down the dungeon. I mean, if you've got that group, that seems absolutely fine to just do that. But I don't know if most groups would be willing for that. One hopes that the player who recently lost their character is, on board for whatever is needed to make the transition smooth.
I would hope. I mean, there's lots of different ways of handling this. There's depending on the level of verisimilitude involved, it might be a case of, right, we're stuck in a deadly place. One of our companions is splattered, and you prisoner or fellow wanderer, let's team up, or we're all going to perish here together. Like.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's straightforward at least, or maybe not without even that level of spiel. Otherwise, like there could be that session where everyone's settled back into their usual bar, feeling a bit morose after Bob or Warlord Scarr perished an ignominious death or a glorious one, and a replacement character is rolled in. Or like perhaps they're recruiting a hireling or a former NPC who was who they got on well with and have a history with.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good point. That was one of the things that earlier games were a bit more handled to deal with. In that, excuse me. Older versions of D&D were much more permissive of having a whole bunch of henchmen and hirelings just kind of wandering around with the party doing various jobs. And it was, in theory, just sort of expected that almost every PC beyond level 3 or so would have a henchman to follow them around. And if their master were to have a horrible fate, that this hireling who, thanks to the way XP worked, even with a half share of the treasure, would still probably have enough XP from that to be reasonably close in level to their original hire, and therefore there was a character sheet ready to go as part of the thing. The Just the way that the game was played for them to just immediately hop straight into, and then you just sort of take your old master's belongings, sell them off, gain some more XP, and that character would in theory be leveled up appropriate enough to keep adventuring with his party. Now
Yeah.
that's go ahead.
And like I was just going to note, yep, they're going to have some history with that hireling. Like a bit of personality.
Yeah.
As in, well, the grumpy one's going to have to step up now.
Oh yeah. I mean, and of course, automatic grudges with the party. So about all those times that you sent me in to test those levers. Well, I feel like at this point I should get a say on whether or not who pokes what levers and jumps on what horrible looking murals.
I mean, yeah, an interesting conversation, full of roleplay potential.
And if you're in the right kind of game for that, then that seems like a pretty good backup plan to have. Unfortunately, owing to various factors, people don't usually play those kinds of games anymore, and you instead sort of get the weird situation of the background starting level NPC PC just suddenly going from I was nobody with like 2 hit points 5 minutes ago, but all of a sudden we need an 11th level wizard, so I guess I'll just pick up this book and just sort of speed read it, and hopefully.
There's still options even then, as in, like the party's reputation could precede at them, and like glorious champions of the next kingdom over think, right, now this is a group worthy of my skills, and it appears I've arrived at a timely moment. They're hard pressed by foes. One of theirs is down.
Yeah.
Divine intervention. Literal Deus Ex Machina. Harriet has been turned into a paragon of divine might, and she's not going to hear any funny business.
Maybe it'll all depend on your particular setting and how it does with people turning into paladins, or nano machines turning you into death robots. And each situation is going to have its own things, but it's something to things like, because replacement characters are already going to be somewhat jarring, and I mean, we can tell people that, you should have talked to your players at the very start and sort of come up with agreed upon rules for, well, what happens if someone dies. But the thing about death in a lot of modern RPGs that it can just sort of come out of nowhere when you least expect it. Not because it makes it sound like it's not like an OSR death when you expect it. Very often in an OSR game, death may be more common, but also you kind of see it coming because, well, I pressed this lever. Oh, looks like it was full of deadly crabs. Whoops, that was my own fault.
Yeah, it depends on the OSR game though, because depending on how many get out of death, cards or fate points or what have you, their wound system, or there may be more survivability than is traditionally expected.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, when you're an old school grim and gritty game, you're automatically going in with the assumption that getting stabbed with a rusty knife will do horrible things to you, and thus you go in sort of ready for horrible things to happen. Whereas in a modern happy flighty a game of Rock's Adventure, you could just kind of bumble through, get in, 20 sessions of character development and deep personal bonds and oaths to defeat the great villain, and then you're in some kind of odd situation, and the GM has to look up what happens when you accidentally step inside the tube of utter disintegration, or does it count as a critical hit when you're trampled by 15 rhinos, and all of a sudden you've gone from character with a full backstory and future story to a pile of mulch on the ground, and then where do you improv from there? So to get back to my point, when you're introducing this new character, you're already in a sort of, not traumatized, but people will tend to be upset and not entirely sure of the situation and what it means to the game as a whole. And so you're sort of looking to say whether either you're going to have to acknowledge and work with that, uncomfortable feeling of who is this new guy, or, did Cousin Darren come in because people, audience weren't testing well and said we needed a wisecracking old guy? I mean, if your plan is to, have this be a 2-session character, and then, you'll find the scroll of resurrection and read it, and Billy Bob the First will return in a ray of golden sunshine from heaven. Maybe just make it clear to the characters that is the plan, and they might want to change the plan after they find out they like this second guy more than the original character. That can always happen. So,
well, sorry. Please continue.
No. Please go on.
Yeah. So there's also, we're assuming here that characters are being replaced only because the previous character's been killed, but that's not always the case. A character could, for in-character or out-of-character reasons, leave the group. As in, the situation is such that they feel they've accomplished all they can with this group. Or more from more meta view, the character just isn't working out. Mm-hmm. They're not enjoying the character as much as they thought they would, or as much the player isn't getting the fun out of the character. So, that character waves goodbye and wanders off, and the party might be a bit depending on how they got on with them, they might be thinking, that things are a little sad, or thank God they're that so and so's gone.
Yeah,
might be a bit more receptive to a replacement.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, you're probably going to want to make this smooth, rather than, for most of these situations, you're going to want to make it a smooth transition to the next character. So, making a big song and dance about the new guy coming in is still an option. But maybe if you're going to have an intro session, maybe that one is more likely you want that to be a one-on-one session between GM and player, rather than taking up half the next session as you lovingly describe this guy walking from the other side of the country to find the predestined other group and join them up just as they're feeling as terrible as possible. Yeah, if you're having to do this as part of a session, and maybe a session that was already ongoing, you want to have it done more quickly and then immediately start getting back into the action. Don't let this, trip up the rest of the players, because it you don't want it to be this noticeable, break in the flow that people just have no option but to fixate on. So moving on, and in most situations, it's not going to be a universal thing. Sometimes the fact that this is a complete new character and new dynamic, you want to put some emphasis on why they're there, just so that they gel better. But in most situations, I think if you're looking for a rule of thumb, and remember, all rules of thumb are just handy shortcuts, they're not universal. But if you want a rule of thumb, then probably making it short, or taking say, oh, you're out of the session, come up with your character, and then in between sessions we'll work out all the details of how to get them in, and then have a proper introduction session next time. If you have the luxury of doing that, then yeah, sure, do a fully thought out way to integrate them with the party again over time, sure. But in a lot of situations, the default should be let's just get into the flow of play again by having the new character show up, be integrated, and move on.
Like these are things that need considering. Like at least in games where a character death or exit are options.
And most of them they are. That's just not all of them. Some you will have some games where you get it right first time and just never roll those natural ones at the wrong time. But yeah, we're trying to explain this to maybe a bit of a lost GM who is a little uncertain of what the best foot is going forward. And as I said, all situations are party dependent. Some parties would absolutely be happy to spend their entire session just watching a new guy come in and bumble his way towards where the party are. It's,
well,
if you're in that kind of group,
players that compelling in such a role.
Absolutely, like if you've got the party and they've got if your character, you've got the character who's really excited about showing off a new character, that sort of energy can give you a sort of impetus to watch them for a minute, to get their vibe and let them play around for a bit. But in the end, when you're introducing characters either at the start of a game or halfway through one, the point is to get to the game. The character introduction is useful setting. It's the first foot forward to get the game going, but it's only an element of that. Do not overly fixate on it, but think about it beforehand, and when it comes up, be ready for how to do this, because ultimately, if you're going to just throw a bunch of people into a tavern and watches them burn the town to the ground, maybe a better introduction might have helped you get where you need to go, instead of having to all of a sudden stat out the village militia and what the AC is having a tin pot and a shillelagh is going to do against your party of first level killing machines. Sorry, we're sounding very cynical today.
A little bit, but yeah, as opposed to our usual cheerful, optimistic selves.
Well, yes. So, folks, if you'd like to introduce your character or explain in excruciating detail how all your players burn down that starting tavern, you can hit us up on our social media, or come to our Discord. That is, that's also social media.
Kind of like a tavern, but virtually.
Yes, and it cannot be burned. Oh, well, I don't know. Discord coming out with new features that might be on the cards. But regardless, thank you all for our great introduction. But this party is over.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. Join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license, but you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.